On August 28th, we have a lunar eclipse at 4 degrees in Pisces. This is the second pair of the eclipse in this eclipse season, the last eclipse this year, and the final eclipse in Pisces within the Pisces-Virgo nodal cycle or nodal axis. Before we go deeper, let's take a moment to understand what a lunar eclipse actually is. A lunar eclipse is an intensified full moon. A full moon is a time of endings, culminations, illuminations, awareness, and a lunar eclipse does not only carry the energy of a full moon, but life-changing events usually take place during a lunar eclipse. We reach the end of a chapter of our life. Sometimes our life direction changes during that time, and something that has been developing can reach a point where you finally see it more clearly. Because this chapter started astrologically back in September 2024, so you are looking back at a story that has been unfolding for the last 2 years. My name is Christine. I'm a Western and evolutionary astrologer and a life coach. Welcome for those of you who are new here, and welcome back for those who have been following this channel. Today, we're going to look at this lunar eclipse in a very different way. We are going to talk about why this eclipse may bring a powerful realization or closure about something you've been living through the last 2 years. And you might suddenly realize or see an old situation from an entirely different perspective. And you might understand why this eclipse cycle may actually show you or illuminate for you how much you have grown. As always, I will look at what it means for all 12 rising signs. So let's begin. If you've ever experienced a real closure in your life, you know that sometimes closures don't arrive with a dramatic ending. Sometimes you simply realize that something doesn't have the same hold on you anymore. And that is the kind of feeling this lunar eclipse will bring, specifically in Pisces. So this lunar eclipse will take place at 4 degrees in Pisces, which is also carrying the Cancer vibration through the degree theory. Not only the eclipse is happening in Pisces, which is a water sign full of feelings, intense feelings, but also it's carrying the energy of another water sign, which is the Cancer sign. So during this eclipse, you may feel emotional more than usual. You might find yourself going through the past or remembering certain moments or memories or feelings or experiences. And because we are bringing closure to that story or this chapter, I would highly encourage you to be aware and prepared that in case you get emotional or find yourself in an emotional entangled pattern, in the past memories or past experiences, be very mindful to yourself and very passionate with yourself, especially if those experiences bring some challenging feelings for you. Instead, acknowledge what comes up, allow yourself to feel it, gently bring it to your attention back to the present. And instead of trying to focus on difficult feelings or difficult experiences, try to think, what did the experience teach you? What did this chapter show you in your life? How much have you changed because of this experience? And how did you grow? And what did you learn because of it? And finally, what are you taking with you? And what are you ready to leave behind? This eclipse isn't asking you to relive the past. It's actually asking you the opposite. It's asking you to recognize your growth and allow yourself to move forward. And this is where the Pisces element or sign becomes so important. Pisces is the last sign of the zodiac. So Pisces could mean a completion or ending. Pisces also carries a healing energy. So while we are closing a chapter in our life, we're also healing from the challenges or the feelings, difficult feelings that we have experienced during this time. This eclipse will interact with other planets, which will give us some insight into the energy of this eclipse. The lunar eclipse in Pisces is opposite Mercury in Virgo. And this Mercury is not only by itself, it's actually called Mercury Cazimi because it will be conjuncting the sun. So it's going to be in the heart of the sun. And this is fascinating because whatever comes clear or revealed to you during the eclipse time may be difficult for your mind to fully acknowledge and understand. And this is where we go back to the water sign, where we need to drop into our heart and feel it with our heart and not get entangled with the battle that could go between our mind and our heart. because Mercury wants a narrative. But during this time, you are being encouraged to put aside your logical way of thinking. It's not going to help that time. What you need is your intuition. What you cannot understand with your mind, your heart, and your intuition will help you get through this. At the same time, the lunar eclipse squares Uranus in Gemini. This is a very Uranian experience. Uranus is a planet that comes in with experiences that are not expected. And because it's a square, it is not a comfortable energy. The realization or what comes to your awareness might not be comfortable. You might suddenly understand things that you did not see before. Maybe why you kept repeating certain patterns, why you stayed, why you left. Why were you afraid and what attracted you to something and why you needed this experience to happen on a soul level? And here's an important part. Whatever you are realizing now that you didn't see before, you need to be kind to yourself because this is a time where you can go into the loop of blaming yourself or feeling guilty. Maybe fears can come up, maybe difficult feelings. And this is why I was saying earlier that this eclipse can bring difficult emotions. But we need to know how to deal with whatever comes up and whatever is revealing during this eclipse. Because we're being asked to close this chapter, we need to close it in a healthy way. So we don't have to repeat those experiences again and again in the coming chapters. What are you finally ready to heal? The eclipse will be sextile to Chiron retrograde in Taurus. And this gives the eclipse another dimension because Chiron is our gate to healing. And then we've got two quincunxes. Quincunx is an aspect that helps us to see where our attention is needed or where an adjustment is needed. So we've got two quincunxes in this eclipse. The first one is a quincunx to Pluto. And this can create this kind of energy that's trying to control the narrative of how this story can end. So you're trying to understand everything. You're trying to make sure that it ends the way you want it to. The other quincunx will happen with Neptune. The eclipse will be quincunxing to Neptune in Aries, and that can create a desire to find answers, trying to understand why it happened. But be careful because Pisces energy is saying surrender, close, and go with the flow and heal. So what's being asked of you is you don't need to have control over the ending. You don't need to have all the answers. Sometimes you simply have to accept it. And the question this eclipse is bringing, can you accept that this chapter is complete? It's done. Take the lesson with you and allow yourself to move forward. So who will feel this eclipse the most? The mutable signs. You might feel this eclipse the most because it's more intense for you. Pisces, Virgo, Gemini, and Sagittarius, especially if you have any personal planets between 1 and 8 degrees in those signs. So let's go through the 12 signs. As always, I highly encourage you to listen to your rising sign because the rising sign will tell you exactly which house is being activated in your individual chart. And that house will tell you where this completion is taking place in your life. If you want, you can listen to your sun and moon signs for intuitive guidance. Aries rising, this eclipse will take part in your 12th house, the house of endings, closures, healing, solitude, and everything that happens beneath the surface. This could be the completion of a very personal, emotional chapter, something you have been carrying quite longer than you have realized. You may be aware of an old fear or an old emotional pattern or something from the past that no longer has the same power over you. So this eclipse is asking you to release it. It's in Pisces, it's in your 12th house, and it's really about releasing and letting go and healing. The North Node is at your 28 degrees in Aquarius, right at the end of your 11th house. And the eclipse is at the 4 degrees Pisces in your 12th house. So there is a strong connection between where you have been heading and what you are being asked to leave behind. So maybe you are realizing that something from your past no longer belongs to your future that you are creating. Then we have a square to Uranus in Gemini, which can bring an unexpected realizations. Something that has been sitting quietly may suddenly become visible through a conversation or piece of information that comes to your awareness, or a memory, or even a realization that comes out of nowhere. And because Uranus is involved, you may not see it coming. So it could be something someone says to you, a message, a conversation with a sibling, or something you read online or hear online. or simply a thought that suddenly enters your mind and changes the way you understand and experience from the past. Because this is a square, the realization might not bring comfortable feelings. You might think, how did I not see this before? But don't judge yourself for what you didn't understand then. The next thing, we have an opposition to Mercury in Virgo, and that's going to take place in your sixth house. And this is especially interesting because Mercury is Cazimi with the sun. So Mercury Cazimi means Mercury is extremely close to the sun, in the heart of the sun, giving Mercury a very strong moment of clarity. So while the eclipse is bringing something emotional from the past, Mercury Cazimi can help you put some words around something that you are trying to understand. You may begin questioning how this old emotional pattern have affected your everyday life, your work, your routines, your responsibilities, even the way you have been taking care of yourself. And then we have Chiron in your second house, sextile the eclipse. This brings the question of self-worth into the healing process. Maybe this experience affected the way you value yourself. This eclipse gives you an opportunity to see that differently and heal your wounds, especially the ones around self-worth and value. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius, and that will take place in your 11th house. Pluto is transforming your friendships, your social circles, your communities, and your vision for the future. So you may feel an uncomfortable tension between the need to close this emotional chapter and the desire to control what happens next. You may want to know who is staying in your life, who is leaving, and how the future will look like and take shape. But Pluto is asking you to let go for that need to control. You don't have to know the entire next chapter. And with the Neptune in your first house, quincunxing the eclipse as well, there may be an adjustment around your identity. You may have been holding onto an old version of yourself because that identity is connected to this chapter that you are closing now. But now that's ending, so you have to tell yourself or ask yourself, what am I without this story? Neptune in your first house reminds you that you don't have to immediately define what's next or who you are becoming next. You can simply allow yourself to evolve. And that's the end of this chapter for you, Aries. You are not only releasing the experience, you are releasing the version of yourself that was created around that experience. So the eclipse question for you is, what are you ready to release so you can finally become the person that you are now? Taurus rising, this eclipse, lunar eclipse, is happening in your 11th house, the house of friendships, communities, social circles, the future that you are creating for yourself. This eclipse can bring completion to one chapter of your life around the people you have been connected with, the plans and the goals that you had for yourself. You may realize that certain relationships don't feel the same anymore. You may have outgrown a social environment or community you are part of. So you may simply realize the future you want now is very different from the future you were working towards 2 years ago. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees in Aquarius in your 10th house becomes significant. The North Node is sitting at the very end of your career and public life house, where the eclipse is moving through your 11th house of the future goals. So there is a strong connection, relationship between where your life is heading and the people or the goals or the communities that are coming with you. So you may be asking yourself, who do I want beside me in this next chapter? And then you have the square to Uranus and Gemini in your second house. Uranus is shaking up your relationship with money, your personal resources, your values, your self-worth. So maybe an unexpected financial development or a sudden change in what you value could make you look different at your friendships and at your future and at your coming goals. You may realize that certain relationships no longer align with your values, or maybe a change in your financial situations could change what you want in your life. You might suddenly think, this is no longer what I want to invest my energy in. And because Uranus is in square to the eclipse, this realization might come through something unexpected. Then we have the opposition to Mercury in Virgo in your 5th house, and it's a Mercury Cazimi. So the 5th house is your creativity, your pleasure, your romance, your kids, and the things that brings you joy. Mercury Cazimi can bring a moment of clarity around what actually makes you happy. You may begin questioning whether you have been making decisions based on what other people are expecting from you instead of what genuinely brings joy to you. Maybe you have been part of a group or community because you have always belonged there. But now you're realizing that your own happiness needs more space. And then we have the Chiron retrograde in Taurus, and that's in your first house, sextiling the eclipse. So that brings your focus back to you, your personality, your identity, your relationship with yourself, and healing relationship with yourself. Maybe you've been concerned about outgrowing certain people and how could that impact you personally. And maybe you might be hurt because of that. But Chiron can help you heal that feeling. You are allowed to evolve and outgrow certain connections. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your 10th house. This is a powerful one because Pluto is transforming your career, your public identity, your life direction, and the role you are playing in the world. You may feel that your career or public presence is changing, but you don't know exactly how it will look like. And maybe this is, there's a temptation to control the process or figure out everything. But Pluto is asking you to allow the transformation to happen because some of the changes happening in your 10th house may need you to leave behind an old version of how you define success. And finally, we have the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your 12th house. This brings another layer of uncertainty. You might sense that something is ending, but you might not understand what is being replaced. So this is where Pisces asks you to surrender. You don't need to have everything figured out. You simply need to recognize what no longer feels aligned. Because Taurus, this eclipse may be showing you that the future you are creating requires different people, different priorities, and perhaps even different definition of success. And that's the real ending of this chapter for you. Not everyone, not everything from your past is meant to come with you into your next chapter. And the eclipse is asking you one question: who and what still belongs in the next chapter you are creating. Gemini rising, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 10th house, the house of career, public life, reputation, achievements, life direction, and the role you are playing in the world. So this eclipse can bring completion to chapter around your career, your public identity, or the direction your life has been taking. You may realize that something you've been working on for a very long time no longer feels the same. Your professional goals might have changed. You no longer want the same recognition or success you once valued or wanted. Or maybe you are ready to close one professional chapter and move towards something that feels more meaningful. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees Aquarius in your 9th house becomes important. The North Node is at the very end of your 9th house, of the higher learning, teaching, spirituality, travel, beliefs, and expanding your vision. There is a strong connection between the direction your life is taking and the way your understanding of yourself and your purpose is evolving. You may be realizing that the career or public role you want now needs to reflect a much bigger vision for your life. You may be asking yourself, what do I really want now? And then we have the square to Uranus in Gemini in your 1st house. This is especially very significant because Uranus is moving through your 1st house of identity and personality. So this eclipse can bring a sudden realization that you have changed and your outer life needs to change with you. You may suddenly feel an old role no longer represents who you are, or you might want to change the way you present yourself. Because Uranus is in your 1st house, this realization can feel very personal. You may think, I want to show up differently. I want to be a different person, or I want to change something in the way I show up with my personality. And because this is a square, that awareness might come with some discomfort. It might also be the beginning of a much more authentic direction in your life. Then we have the opposition to Mercury Cazimi in Virgo in your 4th house. And the 4th house is your home, your family, your roots, your emotional foundation. So this eclipse can bring clarity around the relationship between your public life and your private life. You may begin to see how your career or responsibilities have affected your home life. Maybe a change in your family or home situation is making you rethink the direction of your professional life. Because Mercury is Cazimi, there can be a very strong moment of clarity around something you have been trying to understand. You might finally be able to put words around what you actually need. And then we have Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your 12th house sextile this eclipse. This brings healing to something that have been happening quietly beneath the surface. Maybe there is an old insecurity or fear or emotional wound that has influenced your career decisions without you fully realizing it. Or maybe you have been realizing it, but not admitting it. This eclipse is giving you this opportunity to see it fully, to stop allowing it to quietly determine your choices. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your ninth house. Pluto is transforming your beliefs, your understanding of your life path, your education, your spirituality, your sense of purpose. You may be going through a deep transformation in what you believe about your life path and what you believe is possible for you. And as your beliefs change, your career direction may need to change as well. You may realize that your definition of success you were following belonged to an older version of you. But Pluto is asking you to let go of that definition. And finally, we have the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your 11th house. The 11th house is your friendships, your communities, your connections, your networks, and your future goals. So maybe there are some uncertainty around the future you are creating and the people who will be surrounding you or you will be surrounding yourself with. You may sense that your goals are changing, but you don't know exactly what it will look like, or your future is changing and you don't know exactly how that will manifest in your life. And this is where Pisces is asking you to surrender. You don't need to know exactly what comes next. You just need to be present at this moment and simply needs to trust that as you become clearer about who you are, your next chapter will begin to take shape around this new version of you. Because Gemini, this eclipse may be showing you your career or public vision cannot continue to be the same if you are no longer the same person. And that's the real completion of this chapter for you. So the eclipse is asking you one question. What direction is your life path asking you to move toward now that you have internally changed? Cancer rising, this lunar eclipse is happening in your ninth house, the house of higher learning, travel, spirituality, beliefs, teaching, and the way you understand the world around you. This eclipse can bring completion to a chapter around your beliefs, your perspective in life, or a path of learning and personal growth that has been unfolding for you. You may realize that something you strongly believed in 2 years ago no longer feels true. Maybe some of your understanding of some beliefs have changed. Maybe an experience have completely changed the way you see life. Or maybe you feel ready to close a chapter connected to your education or teaching or travel or a certain belief system. And this is where North Node at 29 degrees in Aquarius in your 8th house becomes very significant. The North Node is at the very end of your 8th house. This is the house of transformation, of intimacy, of shared resources, of trust and deep emotional healing. So there is a strong connection between the deeper transformation you have been going through and the new understanding of your life path that is emerging from that transformation. Something you have experienced on a very deep level, maybe completing right now, and that's changing what you believe in about yourself, about your relationship, and about life path itself. Maybe you're asking yourself, what do I believe now after everything I have been through? And then we have the square to Uranus in Gemini in your 12th house. This is a very interesting placement because Uranus is working behind the scenes in the house of your unconscious mind, your hidden patterns, the things you don't always consciously understand. So an unexpected realization might come from something you have been feeling internally for a very long time. It could be a memory, a sudden intuitive knowing, or maybe something you have been avoiding suddenly comes impossible for you to ignore now. Because Uranus is in your 12th house, you might suddenly think, I don't believe this way anymore. And because this is a square, this realization may initially feel unsettling. Then we have the opposition to Mercury Cazimi in the 3rd house. The 3rd house is your thinking, your communication, your learning, your conversation, your mental ability, and the way you process information. There could be a very interesting conversation taking place between your 9th house beliefs and your 3rd house mind or mental awareness. Mercury Cazimi can bring a powerful moment of mental clarity. You may hear something, learn something, have a conversation that changes the way you understand a much bigger question in your life path. Something you have been trying to make sense of might finally come together. This opposition reminds you that changing your perspective doesn't mean that you need to have all the answers immediately. And then we have Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your 11th house, sextiling this eclipse. This brings healing through your friendships, community, and the people you surround yourself with. Perhaps certain people have helped you see life differently. Or maybe you have discovered that you no longer feel comfortable in certain connections because your values and beliefs have changed. Chiron will help you to heal the fear of outgrowing people. You don't have to remain connected to something simply because it has been part of your life for a long time. Sometimes growth changes the people you naturally feel connected to. And when we have a quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your 8th house, Pluto is transforming something very deep within you. Your relationship with trust, vulnerability, intimacy, shared resources, and emotional attachment. There may be an uncomfortable realization that the way you have been trying to protect yourself is no longer working. You may want to control the outcome of a situation or understand exactly why something has happened. But Pluto is asking you to release that need for control. And finally, we've got the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your 10th house. The 10th house represents your career, public life, reputation, your life direction, and you might be sensing that your professional or public direction is changing, but you might not yet know exactly where you are going or heading next. So you might have an inner feeling that your life is heading into a different direction. And this is where Pisces is asking you to surrender, to trust. You don't have to have a complete vision yet. You can allow your understanding of your life path to evolve before deciding what comes next. Because Cancer, this eclipse might be showing you that you cannot step into your next chapter with the same beliefs, understanding, and vision of life path that belonged to a previous chapter. And that's a real completion of this chapter for you. You are not only changing what you believe, you are changing the meaning that you give to that belief. So the eclipse question for you is, what have your experiences taught you that you can no longer pretend you don't know yet? And Leo rising, this eclipse is happening in your 8th house, the house of deep transformation, intimacy, shared resources, emotional attachment, trust, and the things you need to let go in order to move forward. So this eclipse can bring completion to a chapter connected to a deep emotional bond, a shared financial situation, an intimate relationship, or something that has a powerful hold on you that started 2 years ago. You may realize that you are no longer emotionally attached to something in the same way. You may have been holding onto a person, a relationship, a fear, or even an old emotional story because letting go felt too difficult or scary. Now, something inside you might be simply saying, I'm ready to release this. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees Aquarius in your 7th house becomes very significant. The North Node is at the very end of your relationship house, where this eclipse is happening in your 8th house of deep emotional attachment. So there is a strong connection between the relationship you are moving toward and the emotional patterns you are finally ready to leave behind. You may be realizing that the kind of relationship you want in your next chapter requires to relate to differently. What do you need to let go in order to experience your relationships differently? And then we have the square to Uranus in Gemini. It's happening in your 11th house. This is the house of friendships and communities and social networks and circles and future goals or plans. So unexpected change involving a friend or group or community or even a future goal could suddenly bring something to your attention about an emotional situation. Someone may say something that changes your perspective. A friendship could be evolving unexpectedly. When I say evolving, it doesn't mean that it's growing. It could be actually ending. So maybe suddenly you realize the future you want requires different people around you, people that feels more connected to you as this new chapter is unfolding. Because Uranus is in square to this eclipse, so realization might not come gently. It might disrupt an expectation that you had about where a relationship or a situation was going. Sometimes disruption shows us where we are holding on to something simply because it feels familiar. Then we have the opposition to Mercury Cazimi in Virgo in your 2nd house. Your 2nd house is the house of your money, your personal resources, your self-worth, your values. Mercury Cazimi can bring a moment of clarity, understanding something that actually feels worthy for you or valuable for you. This could be a financial situation or opportunity, especially if there are shared resources involved. It could be very emotional for you. You might suddenly recognize where you have been giving too much or compromising too much or attaching your value to someone else's response to you. You may realize, I don't need to prove my worth through this anymore. And then we have Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your 10th house, sextiling the eclipse. This brings healing into your career, your public identity, your sense of accomplishments, and your definition of success. So you might have been carrying an old wound around recognition or success or your place in the world. Chiron is offering you an opportunity to heal that. Heal this relationship with achievements and success. You don't have to keep proving yourself to feel valuable. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your 7th house. This is really powerful because Pluto is transforming your relationships and the way you experience power, control, intimacy, equality within partnerships or relationships, especially marriage ones or business ones. You may become aware of a relationship dynamic that you can no longer participate in, or you might want to control how another person responds to you. You might want certainty around whether someone stays or leaves, or someone is on board or not. But Pluto is asking you to release the need to control another person's choices. And finally, we've got the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your 9th house. The 9th house is your belief, your spirituality, your higher learning, your travel, your understanding of your life path. You may be trying to understand why a certain relationship or experience took place. You may be searching for a bigger meaning, but Neptune reminds you that you might not be able to explain everything logically or understand everything in a logical way. Sometimes the meaning of an experience becomes clear only after you have moved through it and it has ended. So Leo, this eclipse may be asking you to release an emotional attachment that has kept you connected to an older version of yourself. You don't have to carry the emotional weight of a relationship or an experience simply because it changed you. You can keep the wisdom without keeping the attachment, and that's the real completion for you, Leo. You are learning that letting go does not erase what happened. It means it no longer controls where you go next. And the eclipse question for you, Leo, is what is the emotional attachment that you are ready to release so that you can experience relationships from a healthier and more empowered place? Virgo rising, this eclipse, lunar eclipse, is happening in your 7th house. It's an angular house, the house of relationships, partnerships, marriage, clients, and the people you choose to walk through life with. So this eclipse can bring completion to a chapter connected to a significant relationship or the way you have been relating to another person. You may realize that a relationship has changed. Maybe the connection no longer feels the same. Maybe you have been trying to hold something together that has already reached its natural ending. Or maybe simply you recognize that you are no longer willing to participate in the same relationship dynamics as before. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees Aquarius in your 6th house becomes so significant. The North Node at the very end of your daily house, daily activities, the work, the routines, the health, the responsibilities, where this eclipse is happening in your relationship house on the 7th house. So there could be a realization that the relationship you want needs to fit the life you are creating now. Does this relationship support the life you are trying to build? And then we have the square to Uranus in Gemini in your 10th house. So that adds another layer. 10th house is your career, public life, reputation, life direction. An unexpected development in your career or public life could affect a romantic or business relationship. A change in your professional direction may change your priorities. You may suddenly realize that you cannot continue balancing your personal and professional life in the same way it has been. Or someone may respond differently to the changes you are making in your life. Because Uranus is a square to this eclipse, something may happen that forces you to look at the relationship differently. Then we have the opposition to Mercury Cazimi in Virgo in your 1st house. This is really significant because Mercury is your ruler planet. It rules your entire chart, and it's sitting in the 1st house of identity. Mercury Cazimi can bring a powerful moment of clarity about yourself. You might suddenly understand how much you have changed and how much you have changed within a relationship. What does this relationship mean for you now? And now the question becomes, who are you within this relationship? You may finally put words around something you have been feeling for a long time. And Mercury is in your first house. This is not about the other person. It's about you. We have Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your ninth house, sextile in the eclipse. And this brings healing opportunity around your belief, trust in your life path, spirituality, your understanding of what relationships are supposed to be. Maybe an experience in a relationship changed what you believe about love and commitment and partnerships. And Chiron is here to offer you an opportunity to heal from that experience without allowing it to define your next chapter. You can change your beliefs about relationship without losing your heart or closing your heart. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius, and that is in your sixth house. So Pluto is transforming your daily life, your work routine, your responsibilities. There might be an uncomfortable realization that the way you have been organizing your life around someone else can no longer continue. Maybe you have been carrying too much or doing too much or adjusting too much or allowing someone else need to determine your daily life. Pluto is now asking you to look honestly at where the balance of power exists in your everyday life. And finally, we have quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your eighth house. So that adds another layer, because the eighth house is your house of emotional intimacy, emotional dynamics, shared resources, trust, vulnerability, and attachment. You might be seeking some certainty about what another person is feeling or what is happening next. You might want to know whether you can trust the situation, but Neptune doesn't always give us immediate answers. Pisces is reminding you that you don't have to force clarity before it's ready to evolve. Sometimes you know enough. So Virgo, this eclipse may be showing you that a relationship can only continue in its current form if it still fits the person you are becoming. You are being asked not to hold on to something simply because it has history. You are being asked to look at the relationship honestly and decide, is it still aligned with your life path? And that's the real completion for you, Virgo. You are learning that choosing yourself does not mean you are rejecting another person. Sometimes it simply means you are no longer willing to abandon yourself to maintain a relationship. So the eclipse question for you is, what needs to change in your relationship so you no longer have to compromise who you are becoming? Libra rising, this eclipse, lunar eclipse, is happening in your sixth house, the house of daily life, work, routines, responsibilities, health, and the way you organize your everyday world. This eclipse can bring completion to a chapter around your work, routines, responsibilities, or the way you have been taking care of yourself. You may realize that the way you have been living day to day is no longer sustainable. You may have been carrying responsibilities that needs to change, or maybe your work situation is changing, or maybe something about recognizing your daily life needs to look different because of the change that took place. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees in Aquarius in your fifth house becomes significant. The North Node is at the very end of your house of creativity, romance, self-expression, and the things that makes you feel alive, while the eclipse is happening in your sixth house of daily responsibilities. So there is a connection between the life you are creating and the way you spend your everyday energy. You may realize that your responsibilities have taken up so much space that there is not enough room left for you to live, to feel joyful, to feel alive. Where is joy in your life, in your everyday life today? And then we have a square to Uranus in Gemini in your ninth house. Ninth house is the house of beliefs, spirituality, higher education, travel, teaching, and the broader vision of life. So unexpected experience connected to your beliefs or education or travel or something that expands your perspective could suddenly change how you look at your daily life. You may discover that you no longer believe you have to live the way you have been living. A new idea could change your priorities. Conversation or something you learn can make you question an old routine. Uranus is square to the eclipse. This change might come suddenly and require you to adjust accordingly. Then we have the opposition to Mercury Cazimi in Virgo in your 12th house. This is a powerful placement because 12th house is what happens behind the scenes, your unconscious patterns, private thoughts, fears, and things you might not be aware of. Mercury Cazimi can bring clarity to something that has been operating quietly in your background. You might suddenly recognize why you have been living your life in a certain way, why you keep overworking, why you find it difficult to rest, why you take on responsibility that are not yours, and why you keep putting yourself last. And this realization can change the way you organize your everyday life. So then we have Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your eighth house, sextiling the eclipse. This eighth house brings us into a deeper emotional healing, intimacy and trust and shared resources and vulnerability. So this could be a healing opportunity for you around something that has made you feel emotionally dependent or insecure or unable to fully trust yourself. Maybe an old experience had influenced the way you deal with responsibility or control. Chiron is offering you an opportunity to understand that wound differently. You don't have to keep protecting yourself in the same way. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your fifth house. Pluto is transforming your relationship with joy, creativity, romance, expression, self-expression, and what makes you feel alive. There may be an uncomfortable tension between your responsibilities and your desire to actually enjoy your life. You may be trying to control how everything gets done before allowing yourself to have fun. But Pluto is asking you to reconsider that. Something about the way you experience pleasure and self-expression is changing, and your daily life might need to make room for that transformation. And finally, we have quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your seventh house. Seventh house is your house of relationships and partnerships. So maybe there's an uncertainty around how you're changing your daily life and how could that affect a certain relationship, a marriage or business relationship. Maybe you're realizing that you cannot continue doing everything for everyone, or maybe your relationship needs adjustment because your priorities are changing now. Neptune can make it feel tempting to avoid difficult conversations or simply hope things will work themselves out. But Pisces is asking you to accept what is true without forcing an outcome. So Libra, this eclipse is showing you that your everyday life needs to change because the person you are becoming needs something different. You may be closing a chapter where you were constantly doing, fixing, managing, taking care of everything, and that's a real completion for you, Libra. You are learning that a meaningful life isn't created only around fulfilling your responsibilities. It's also created by making space for the things that makes you feel alive. So the eclipse question for you is, what needs to change in your everyday life so there is finally room for your life to feel actually alive? Scorpio rising, this lunar eclipse is happening in your fifth house, the house of creativity, of romance, of pleasure, of children, of self-expression, and the part of life where you allow yourself to simply be you. So this eclipse can bring completion to a chapter around romantic relationship, a creative project, or your relationship with your children, or simply the way you have allowed yourself to experience joy. You may realize that something you once loved no longer feels the same. Maybe a creative dream has changed, or maybe a romantic connection has reached its turning point. And turning point meaning doesn't mean necessarily ending, but the pattern will change. Maybe you are realizing that you have spent too much of your life doing what was expected of you and not enough time doing what you actually want or what makes you feel happy. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees Aquarius in your fourth house becomes very significant. The North Node is at the very end of your house of home, family, emotional roots, your private life, where the eclipse is happening in your fifth house, the house of joy and self-expression. So there is a connection between the emotional foundation you are creating and the life you are allowing yourself to enjoy. Maybe you are realizing that the person you are becoming needs a different kind of home life, one where there is more room for your own happiness. What would you choose if you allowed yourself to want what you actually want in your life? And then we have the square to Uranus in Gemini in your eighth house. The eighth house is the house of shared finances, of intimacy, of emotional attachments, trust, and the deep psychological bonds that you have with others and with yourself. So unexpected development around money, intimacy, or a close relationship could suddenly affect something you love or the way you express yourself. A financial change could force you to rethink a personal plan. Something around what a person says or does could change your understanding of an intimate connection. Maybe you suddenly realize that an emotional attachment has been limiting your freedom to enjoy your own life. And because Uranus is in square to the eclipse, this realization might become unexpectedly. Then you have the opposition to Mercury Cazimi in your 11th house. The 11th house is the house of friendships, communities, social circles, networks, and future goals. Mercury Kazemi can bring a moment of clarity around the people you surround yourself with and the future you are creating. You may realize that certain friendships support who you are becoming and others no longer do. Maybe you have been following a goal because it once made sense, but now your heart wants something different. And the opposition asks you to find a balance between what brings you personal joy and what you think you are supposed to contribute to others and show up in a public role. You may finally give yourself permission to say, this is what I want for myself. And then we have Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your seventh house, sextiling the eclipse. The seventh house brings healing into your relationships and partnerships. Maybe a past relationship affected your confidence in being loved or seen or appreciated for who you truly are. And maybe you learned to suppress your own desires in order to keep the peace in the relationships. Chiron is offering you an opportunity to heal that pattern. You don't have to make yourself small to be loved. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your fourth house. Pluto is transforming your home, your family dynamics, your emotional foundations, your relationship with your past. So maybe there are uncomfortable realizations about how your childhood or family environment influenced your ability to experience pleasure and express yourself freely. Maybe you learned early in life that you have to be responsible and that your needs come after everyone else. Pluto is asking you to recognize that pattern and decide whether it still belongs to your current life. And finally, we've got the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your sixth house. The sixth house is the house of daily routines, work responsibilities, the way you structure your everyday life. You may feel that you want more joy and creativity, but you don't know exactly how to fit this in your daily responsibilities. Or maybe you are waiting for something else to be taken care of before you allow yourself to enjoy your life. But Neptune reminds you that there will be always something else to do. So you may have to consciously make space for what matters to you. So Scorpio, this eclipse may be showing you that your relationship with joy is changing. You are not the same person who wanted the same things 2 years ago. And that's okay. You don't need to justify what makes you happy. You don't need everyone to understand it. And you don't need to wait for permission to create the life that feels good to you. And that's the real completion for you, Scorpio. You are releasing the belief that life has to be difficult before you are allowed to enjoy it. You are giving yourself a permission to want something simply because it makes your heart feels alive. So the question for you now in this lunar eclipse, Scorpio, is what would bring joy into your life if you stopped living according to what other people think you should be doing or wanting in your life? Sagittarius rising, this lunar eclipse is happening in your fourth house, the house of home, family, roots, childhood, your private life, and your emotional foundation. So this eclipse can bring completion to a chapter connected to your home or family or your relationship with your past or the emotional foundation you have been building for yourself. You may realize that something from your family history no longer defines you. You may be ready to leave a home, change your living situation, create a different kind of family dynamic, or simply emotionally separate yourself from something you have been carrying for a very long time. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees in Aquarius in your third house becomes so significant. The North Node is at the very end of your house of communication, learning, siblings, and the way you think and express yourself, while the eclipse is happening in your fourth house. So there is a connection between the way you are beginning to think differently and the emotional foundation you are creating for yourself. You may see that you no longer tell yourself the same story about your childhood or your family or where you came from. You may be ready to tell a different story. And then we have the square to Uranus in Gemini in your seventh house. The seventh house is the house of marriage, partnerships, close relationships, and the people you are directly involved with. So unexpected development in a relationship could affect your home or family life. A partner may suddenly want something different. A conversation could change the way you see a relationship. Or you may realize the kind of relationship you want needs a different emotional foundation than the one you grew up with. Because Uranus is in your seventh house, another person may be the catalyst of this realization. It's a square. And this may change the way you feel. It might not be comfortable at the beginning. So it can show up where an old family pattern is still influencing the way you relate to other people. And then we have the opposition to Mercury Kazemi in Virgo in your 10th house. 10th house is the house of career, public life, reputation, life direction. So that creates a powerful tension between your private life and your public life. Mercury Kazemi can bring clarity around something you have been trying to understand. You may suddenly realize that your career goals have been shaped by something from your childhood or family patterns. You might be recognizing that the way you have been defining success no longer fits the life you actually want to live. So you may finally be able to put words around something you have known internally for a very long time. You might be saying to yourself, I don't want to build my life this way anymore. And then we have Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your 6th house, sextile the eclipse. This brings healing through your daily life, work, routines, responsibilities, and the relationship with your physical well-being. An old emotional pattern may have affected the way you work or the amount of responsibility you take on. Maybe you learned early in life that you had to be strong, useful, or responsible for everybody else. Chiron is giving you an opportunity to recognize that pattern and heal it so that you can create a healthier way of living. You don't have to keep proving your strength by carrying everything. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your 3rd house. Pluto is transforming the way you think, communicate, process information, and tell yourself the story that you have been telling yourself. This can be really powerful because when an eclipse is happening in your 4th house, you might become aware that the story you have been telling yourself about your past or your family dynamics or your childhood no longer feels the same. You might want to understand why your family was the way it was. You might want certain things to happen, and then you want to understand why you became the person you became. But Pluto is asking you to understand your past without remaining emotionally controlled by it. Finally, you have the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your 5th house. The 5th house is the house of joy, creativity, romance, children, self-expression. You may sense that you want to live differently, experience life differently, more joyful. You might not yet know exactly how it will look like. So you might have spent so much time and so much energy fulfilling family expectations or responsibilities that you have lost touch with what simply makes you feel happy. Neptune is allowing you to discover what feels meaningful for you now. So Sagittarius, this eclipse may be showing you that you are not responsible for carrying your family's emotional story into your future. You can honor where you came from without allowing it to determine where you are going. And that's the real completion for you, Sagittarius. You are creating an emotional home that doesn't have to look like the one you came from. So the eclipse question for you is, what part of your past are you ready to stop carrying so you can create a different future? Capricorn rising, this lunar eclipse is happening in your 3rd house, the house of communication, your mindset, learning, siblings, your immediate environment, and the way you make sense of your experiences. This eclipse can bring completion to a chapter connected to something that you have been thinking about, talking about, learning about, or trying to understand. There may be a conversation that finally reaches its natural conclusion. You may stop trying to explain yourself to someone or even to yourself. You may finally say something that you have been holding back for a very long time. Or you may simply realize that you no longer see a situation in the way you did 2 years ago. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees Aquarius in your 2nd house becomes very important. The North Node is at the very end of your house of self-worth, money, personal resources, and the values, while the eclipse is happening in your 3rd house. You may be realizing that your voice needs to reflect your own values. You may find yourself thinking, I don't need everyone to agree with me anymore, or I don't need everyone to understand me anymore. And then you have the square to Uranus in Gemini in your 6th house. The 6th house is your house of your daily work and responsibilities, and the routine and the way you manage your everyday life. Something unexpected in your daily life may force you to change the way you think about a situation. A chapter, a change at work, a new responsibility, a disruption in your routine, or something that suddenly makes you realize that the way you have been organizing your life is no longer working for you. And because Uranus is in your 2nd house, this realization might come through something very ordinary in your day-to-day life. Something happens and suddenly you see the bigger picture differently, but it's not a very comfortable realization. And then there is the opposition to Mercury Kazemi in Virgo in your 9th house. This is especially very important because the 9th house represents your beliefs, your spirituality, higher learning, teaching, travel, and your understanding of life. Mercury Kazemi can bring a moment of powerful clarity. You might learn something, hear something, have a conversation, or suddenly understand something that changes the way you see your life path. There can be a realization that the way you think about something today is very different from the way you thought about it 2 years ago. And that may be one of the biggest signs that this chapter is actually ending. Then we have Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your fifth house, sextile the eclipse. The fifth house is the house of joy, creativity, romance, children, and self expression. This brings healing around your ability to express yourself without needing to be perfect or having everything figured out together. Maybe you have spent years being responsible and focused on what needs to be done. Maybe you learn to suppress what you really want because there were more important things to take care of. Chiron is giving you an opportunity to reconnect with what you genuinely enjoy and what you want to express. You are allowed to do something simply because it makes you happy. And then you have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your second house. Pluto is transforming your relationship with money, security, self-worth, and what you value. And this can create an uncomfortable realization around the connection between what you think you need and what you actually value. You may have been trying to create security around possessions or money. Pluto is asking you to look deeper. What actually makes you feel secure? Because your values are changing. And when your values change, the decisions you make about your life have to change as well. And finally, we have the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your fourth house. The fourth house is the house of home, family, childhood roots, emotional foundation. So there may be something around your family or private life that you cannot completely understand yet. You may sense that an old emotional pattern is dissolving, but you might not know exactly what will replace it. You may want to understand exactly why you became the person you became. But Neptune is asking you not to force understanding. Some things become clear only when you stop trying to find the perfect explanation. So Capricorn, this eclipse may be showing you that your relationship to your own voice is changing. You don't have to keep explaining to yourself the same scenarios, and you don't have to keep defending choices that no longer need defending. You don't have to keep telling the same story simply because it has been your story for a long time. And that's the real completion for you, Capricorn. You are changing the way you think, the way you speak, and ultimately the story that you tell yourself. And the question of this eclipse for you becomes, what story about yourself that you are ready to stop repeating because you no longer believe it? Aquarius rising, this lunar eclipse is happening in your second house, the house of money, personal resources, self-worth, values, and what gives you sense of security. So this eclipse can bring completion to a chapter around financial situation, your relationship with money and security, and the way you have been measuring your own value. You may realize that something you once believed you needed in order to feel secure no longer has the same importance for you. Maybe your financial priorities have changed. Maybe you're no longer willing to sacrifice your happiness for financial security. Or maybe you simply realize that your value was never determined by what you have, what you earn, or what other people think of you. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees in Aquarius in your first house becomes very significant. The North Node is at the very end of your house of identity, independence, personality, and the person you are becoming, while this eclipse is happening in your second house. So there is a strong connection between who you are becoming and what you are choosing to value. You may be leaving behind an old definition of security because it no longer supports the person you are becoming. You may find yourself asking, what actually matters to you now? And then you have the square to Uranus in Gemini in your fifth house. The fifth house is the house of creativity, romance, children, pleasure, and self-expression. So something unexpected around love, creativity, or something that brings you joy could make you rethink your relationship with money and security. You may suddenly realize that you have been postponing something you love because you were waiting to feel more secure. So an unexpected opportunity could show up that shows you that security and freedom don't have to be opposites to each other. Then we have the eclipse forming the opposition to Mercury Cazimi in Virgo in your eighth house. The eighth house is the house of shared finances, of debts, investments, intimacy, trust, and emotional attachment. This is powerful financial access for you. Mercury Cazimi is bringing clarity around something that has been complicated or difficult for you to understand. You may finally see the truth about a shared financial situation, or you might have an important conversation with someone about money. And then we have Chiron in Taurus in your fourth house, sextiling this eclipse. The fourth house is where you live, your family, your home, your childhood roots, your emotional foundation. This brings healing to the deeper emotional roots of your relationship with security. Something you experienced growing up influence the way you protect yourself today. Maybe you learned that security meaning having more control or having more money or having enough money or never depending on anybody. But Chiron is offering you an opportunity to create a healing definition of safety and security. You can build security without living in the fear of losing it. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius. And Pluto is transforming you, your identity, power. Uncomfortable adjustment may be around letting go of an identity that was built around completely having self-sufficiency or having everything under your own control. You may be discovering that being powerful doesn't mean you have to control everything. And finally, we've got the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your third house. The third house is your mind, your communication, your learning, and the way you process information. So you might find yourself trying to understand what is the next chapter going to look like financially and personally, or both. You might want to know exactly what is going to happen, but Neptune is reminding you that you don't need the entire plan before you take the next step. So allow yourself to listen to what you are feeling intuitively. Aquarius, this eclipse may be showing you that your definition of security is changing because you are changing. What you once needed to feel safe may no longer be what you need now. And that's the real completion for you, Aquarius. You are learning that true security comes from knowing your own value, not from controlling everything around you. So the eclipse question for you is, what are you still holding on to for security reason that no longer reflects the person you are becoming? Pisces rising, this lunar eclipse is happening in your first house, the house of identity, personality, appearance, your body, the way you move through life. So this eclipse can bring completion to a chapter connected to who you have been and how you have been showing up in the world. You may look at yourself and realize, I'm not the same person anymore. Or maybe the way you see yourself has changed. Maybe you no longer want to play the same role for other people. Or maybe you simply feel ready to stop carrying an identity that was created around an old chapter or an old personality in your life. And this is where the North Node at 29 degrees in Aquarius in your 12th house becomes really important. The North Node is at the very end of your house of healing, of solitude, the unconscious, the closure, and everything happening beneath the surface. So while the eclipse is happening in your first house, there is a connection between the inner work you have been doing and the person you are becoming. Something you have been processing privately may finally change the way you see yourself. You may realize, I don't need to be that person anymore. And then we have the square to Uranus in Gemini in your fourth house. This fourth house is the house of where you live, your family, your home, your childhood, the roots, and your emotional foundations. So unexpected development in your home or family dynamics could trigger a major realization about yourself, about your identity. A conversation with a family member, a change in your living situation, something from the past might come and show up. Or it could be an unexpected event that makes you realize how much your past has shaped the person you became. And because Uranus is in your fourth house, this can feel very personal. Something happens in your private world, and suddenly you see yourself differently. Then we have the opposition to Mercury Cazimi in Virgo in your seventh house. The seventh house is your house of relationships, marriage, partnerships, clients, and the people that are close to you. Mercury Cazimi can bring a powerful moment of clarity around someone else. A conversation with a partner can reveal something you have been unable to see about yourself. You may suddenly understand how much you have changed within a relationship, or you might realize that the way you relate to others needs to change because you're no longer the same person who entered this relationship. This can be really important conversation for you because you are finally able to say what you really want to say or what you need. Then we have the Chiron retrograde in Taurus in your third house, sextile in the eclipse. The third house is your communication, your mindset, your learning, your siblings, and the way you process your experiences. This brings healing through your voice. There are things that you have never said. Chiron gives you an opportunity to communicate from a more healed place. And then we have the quincunx to Pluto in Aquarius in your 12th house. This is especially powerful because Pluto is transforming everything happening beneath the surface. Old fears, unconscious patterns, emotional attachments, things you may never have realized before that have been influencing your choices. You may feel a strong desire to understand why you have been the way you have been. But Pluto is asking you to go deeper than understanding. Some patterns don't need to be explained anymore. They just need to be released. And finally, you have the quincunx to Neptune in Aries in your second house. The second house is the house of your money, your personal resources, your values, your self-worth. Neptune here can make you question what actually feels more secure for you financially. And maybe uncertainty around your financial future can take place during this lunar eclipse. You may realize that something you once thought would make you feel safe no longer does. There might be some temptation to look outside of yourself for reassurance. So this eclipse is bringing you back to your own sense of value. You don't need to have everything figured out. So Pisces, this eclipse is deeply personal for you. You're not simply closing a chapter in your life. You are closing the chapter of an old version of yourself. And this is why this eclipse might feel a little bit emotional for you. So that is a real completion for you, Pisces. You are giving yourself a permission to become someone new without needing an explanation for who you are used to be. So the eclipse question for you is who you are ready to become now that you no longer need to be the person you were before. As we are coming to the end to today's video for the lunar eclipse in Pisces, I want you to remember something. This eclipse is simply asking you to recognize that you are no longer the person who entered this chapter 2 years ago. Something has changed in you. Something has healed and something has been better understood, better realized. Something that now you are ready to release. And as this eclipse is unfolding, don't hold so tightly to what is ending. Take the lesson, keep the wisdom, release the weight, because sometimes closure is simply waking up one day and realizing this doesn't have the same hold on me anymore. And this is how you know you have grown, you have become more aware. If this video resonated with you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. If you found this helpful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who might need to hear this message today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Until next time, take good care of yourself, and I see you in the next video.